Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Chilling Reign, make sure you go ahead and check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your order using that code Omnipoke. For today's video, we are going to be looking at our first Evolving Skies deck, and it's going to be based around the poster boy Rayquaza VMAX. So let's jump straight into it with that basic concept, and that is that Rayquaza hits hard. He can one-hit KO VMAXs, and that is going to be the selling point of this archetype, as opposed to pretty much every other archetype out there. You have basically, outside of like Calyrex using things like Alchemy, one of the best ways to have this big one-hit KO option, and then a potential reuse of a back-to-back one-hit KO with the reload of your Flaaffys using Dynamotor and possibly even the Rose Supporter card as well. So that is going to be what we're looking to do here. Stack up a bunch of energies onto your Rayquaza, take a huge knockout, try and reload and do it again. That is going to be the win condition of this archetype. And to be honest, there are a lot of VMAX decks coming into this new format. I feel like there's only one or two potential decks that are going to be two prize attacker based. That's going to be like Zacian decks and possibly some Suicune, like Aurora based decks. But for the most part, you will be slamming into other VMAXs. So that does make this one hit KO option very appealing. So let's jump into the list. And it is very simple. We want to play 4-4 of our Rayquaza, 4-4 of our Flaaffy that gets energies, and 1 Panic Crobat if our opening hands are bad. So here is the Rayquaza. A quick reminder, 320 hit point Dragon type Rapid Strike Pokemon. We actually play no Rapid Strike synergy cards, so think of it as a vanilla dragon. It has no weakness, which is fantastic. It has a 2 retreat cost, which opens us up to use Air Balloon, which is great, and means we can take advantage of Tower of Waters in things like Rapid Strike, Urshifu matchups, which is kind of nice. But this card has the Sky High Wave ability, allowing you to, once during a turn, discard all cards from your hand and draw 3 cards. So it's like a sprint effect from a Zeb Striker, but 1 less card. And this opens up extra discard synergy for our lightning energies, which is always nice because you want to throw those into the discard pile for Dynamotor and for the Rose Supporter as well. It just means we get to dig deep into our deck. It means we can try and hit boss's orders on certain turns, Rose on certain turns, and it means we can get greedy with our support account here, which is where we're going to try and steal a lot of spaces because of this inbuilt sort of consistency to allow us to push towards more ball search in these opening turns and towards supporters so that we're not, whiffing this whole time, which is really nice. Max Burst is that one-hit KO attack that I mentioned. It does 20 plus 80 more for each basic either fire or lightning energy that you choose to discard from the Rayquaza. Most of the time, we're going to be discarding the lightning energies because Flaaffy is going to be stacking these much more easily than us manipulating lots of fires. We only play 3 fire in the list. So having the lightning at our disposal means we can reach those one-hit KOs. Yeah, very dangerous attacking Pokemon. Very good at hitting 320 quite easily. So yeah, or 340 even. So it's pretty much the same number where we're trying to reach here, where you have the 4 lightnings, you toss all of those off, and you keep the fire attached to yourself for that big one-hit KO option. So you can see quite easily with your manual attachment and Dynamotors on top. And again, I keep mentioning that Rose Supporter. That's part of the reason why we get to play the Rose Supporter is this Sky High Wave ability, which means that we can discard our hand with Rose, then we can just Sky High Wave immediately after to draw 3 fresh cards, which is nice. We are only playing for V Pokemon, the Rayquaza. Of course, we need to evolve into the VMAX, but this actually has decent attacks in its own right. The Spiral Burst is like a mini version of Max Burst because you have the exact same attack, the 20 plus 80, but you are capped at exactly 2 energy to discard. So you are effectively capped at 180 damage, which is a good number because, of course, we know that Crobat is still going to be a card in the format. We know that Eldegoss is still going to be a card in the format. So, yeah, the Rayquaza is nice. It also means that we can try and go just a Rayquaza V sort of beatdown approach against the likes of Glaceon, against the likes of Zamazenta. So that is the hope, and that is why we're playing no other Pokemon here, because fortunately Spiral Burst possibly can help us fight that fight against the annoying walling Pokemon. Obviously, it means we have no answer to Decidueye, unfortunately. So, yeah. And, yeah, then we have the Flaaffy's. Dynamotor is literally the exact same card as Electric from back in the day, but it just has different artwork, essentially. 2 retreat cost is nice for the air balloons. Dynamotor is what we're going to try and spam. We have the Chilling Rain Mareep because it has 10 more hit points and a Growl attack that can maybe keep us out of range of some KOs and is going to be important with the amount of Inteleon possibly roaming around. You want to have that extra 10 hit points, that's for sure. And I'm playing 1 copy of Crobat, just that dark asset. Like I said, it's a panic situation card. Your board has to be very specific. You want to pad out with as many Mareeps as possible, have your backup Rayquaza, your active Rayquaza. Crobat only comes down if your opening is lacking lots of Ball Search cards, and you need to Dark Asset for a number of cards. That's really it. We only want to put him into play in those exact situations. Otherwise, he stays in the deck. Onto the trainers then. We play one copy of Energy Search because we have two different types of energy going on in here. This can be that great middle ground. I initially had 4 fire and 9 lightning. Now I've gone down to 3 fire to have the additional out to find lightning energy in the opening turns just for discard synergy, but it also means we still have those exact 4 outs to hit those fires when we're trying to get our turn to attack. So it's just a small upgrade in that regard. I wouldn't go into more energy searches, or I wouldn't go less than 3 fires, I should say, because then you start to get panicked a little bit about Sky High waving too many away and being too reliant on Rose to recover them back, that sort of thing. So energy search is that one sweet spot I think is a small upgrade to just playing 4 physical fires that we initially did have in our list when we were doing some testing on tabletop. From there, we have a ton of Ball Search. As you can see, 3 Incense works on Ray and the Flaaffy, 4 Level Ball works on Mareep and the Flaaffy, 4 Quick Ball for the Rays and the Flaffs, and also the Panic Crobat if need be. And the new Stadium card, Stormy Range, is going to be a really important bounce to path of the peak. Because we are very Sky High Wave reliant, but also it's a great card to see in those opening turns to also get us down additional Mareeps and Rayquazas. Realistically, we are a very setup-based deck. There is a ton of Ball Search in here, and I'm still paranoid that it's not enough. There's been times where I've literally done mock lists that have had the 4th range and the 4th Incense in here as well, because it is so important to get 2 Ray down turn 1 and probably 2 Mareep down turn 1. If that doesn't happen, you start feeling a little bit awkward and start already having to look towards Rose to bail you out of bad spots, because Rayquaza is a hungry boy for attachments, so you really need to feed him with those Dino Motors quite quickly, so we need to pad out our deck with a ton of Ball Search and not much else. Outside of these switch outs, Air Balloon works on everything, the Flaffies and the Rays, which is really nice, and the switches are important as well, because oftentimes you will want to tank a hit with your Rayquaza, as not many other decks will knock you out in one hit. You can switch into an Air Ballooned Pokemon, or you can, retreat your Air Ballooned Rayquaza, do your Dynamators, and switch straight back into the Rayquaza. That is going to be the name of the game here. So yeah, switch a really important card alongside the Air Balloon. That's why we're not playing a full 4 count of Air Balloons, because you're still trying to pivot the Rayquaza that took the hit in the first place, because it's already, retained an energy onto it, the fire energy. So you need 1 less to take a KO, so it opens up Dynamotors and turn attachments, and that has other stuff to take those KOs. Onto the supporters. I've mentioned Rose a bunch, and we are playing 3 copies of the card. It is that important, we feel, to actually finish off the game. We feel it's more important than boss in this exact deck, because oftentimes you're only really bossing orders up like 1 prize Pokemon, or sometimes now and then a Crobat. But you're not really getting Evolving V Pokemon. The numbers don't work out great for you. And oftentimes in a prize race, you would rather wait for them to evolve into a 3 prize Pokemon rather than boss them up for early tempo. Plus, you've had to have drawn ridiculously well to actually boss people for tempo in this sort of deck. It's much easier for you to just build up to a ridiculous energy count and just bop whatever's in the active. And that's why we're leaning more heavily towards the Rose side of things. Yes, you need to have a lot of energy in your discard pile, but we play a good amount, and we're hoping that Rose, at the very least, is going to be that late game play. The second Rayquaza, or the second attack of your first Rayquaza, this can be the finishing move. And that's why we're playing 3 copies. We want to have access to it via the Sky High Wave. We want to research into it and set it up for the following turn, that sort of thing. So yeah, you want to play a high count, because you never know when you could just wave goodbye to too many Roses by having to use the Rayquaza's ability. We are playing 1 Marnie in here. It's just to be a 5th supporter, to be honest, just so that we aren't forced into Crobat like every single game. So having the 4 research and the additional Marnie just for that bit of a safety net to actually get ourselves into the game when we are going second is going to be important. But realistically, if you believe enough in the Rayquaza and the Sky High Wave, padding out your deck with just more Ball Search will be more consistent than having more than this 1 copy of Marnie in most situations. It feels like when you put in that 4th Incense, that 4th range, it starts to become diminishing returns. So that's why we've lent back to the Marnie. We have played more Marnie in the past, but it does feel like you're normally just binning these off to then dig for the Rose and the boss's orders in the late game to be that sort of finishing move. So yeah, just the 1 copy to improve our turn 1 and 2 hands so that we actually can get into the game, because we are still setup based, of course. But yeah, Research and Rose are going to be kind of the forefront of the deck for the most part, especially because Research has discard synergy for lightning energy, which we are playing 9 of, as well as those 3 fire. Like I said, I feel like 9 lightning plus the E-Search gives us a good amount of options to find these lightnings throughout the early game, so that not only we are discarding them pre-Sky High Wave, but then sometimes like after the Sky High Wave and stuff like that, because you want to be dynamotoring a ton. Of course, that is the whole metric of the deck. I was looking back at lots of old Ray Eels lists from the EX era, and they oftentimes sat around these sorts of counts. Obviously, they didn't have Rose, so I feel comfortable playing just 3 Fire. Yeah, 8 to 9 energy was kind of where they were at in the old EX era, so we're sort of looking back to the old lists to see how things functioned, and this seems to be a good number for us. So the full list is here. It'll also be in the description below. But yeah, pause now if you want to take a good look. But let's have a look at some other tech options, because as you could see, the list was very 4-of focused, and we're not playing much creative or techie kind of cards at all, to be honest. And we are lacking recovery pieces. We do not have a rescue trolley in the list, or anything like Eldegoss or Palpad to recover supporter cards. Trolley of obviously getting back Pokemon and hoping that you can really cash in on those Flaaffies. I think the rescue trolley is one of those cards where you're going to have those games where you Sky High Wave away a Flaaffy before you get a Mareep down or something like that, and you feel like, oh, I wish I could get this card back sort of thing. Or if your opponent is bossing up your Flaaffies, you like having the trolley for instant access to respond in that way. But ultimately, it's a card that you need to have in like the section of your deck that is like 20 to 40 cards. That's the best place to draw Rescue Trolley. So there's 2/3 of games where you draw it at the wrong time and it's not going to be helpful for you anyways. Plus, it feels like if people are going after Flaaffies, it just enables you to manually attach and go through the Rose path anyway a lot of the time. So the 4/4 line of the Flaaffy, I think with the amount of ball search, is typically going to serve you better, because Rescue Trolley is terrible in your opening like 14 cards from like your opening hand and your first research, when you'd rather it just be ball cards. Then it gets decent in late game, or like the mid game, I should say, not even the late game, because Rose then becomes more of a win condition than a Flaaffy. So yeah, you really need to draw this in a very specific time in the game for it to be good. Same sort of thing can be said for the Eldegoss and Palpad. I would actually lean more towards Pad than Eldegoss. Sounds very strange, but the board space is so tight that I think Palpad may actually be better, despite the amount of ball search Eldegoss gives you to actually hit supporters. If you're padding in like the double boss that we accidentally drew too early, or the roses that we drew too early, and just having like 2 Sky High Waves available gives you pretty good outs of actually getting towards it in those later stages. So Palpad is actually a reasonable one that I could consider, but ultimately I'm at that point where I might just play a 4th Rose at that stage, to be honest, or that 3rd boss. The Palpad sits in the middle of those two things, so in some instances it does sort of buy you that space, but ultimately I feel like it's not a huge deal. For other lightning Pokemon, you can think about having Boltund for early Electrify when you're going second to sort of split your energy around that little bit better. But it does give up an easy 2 prizes, and I think that is relevant in the race, because oftentimes people will look to take out Flaaffies anyway, and you're basically giving them the license to KO Boltund, KO Flaaffy, and that's going to be annoying for you. Whereas if you just play the 3 prizes and the Flaaffies, it actually hurts their map that little bit more to actually go after your 1 prize Pokemon, which is going to be important. And at the same time, you already have to have drawn quite well to actually make the Boltund work, because you need to have already like your ball search or whatever committed to Rayquaza and Mareep, so you kind of just have to draw Boltund, which isn't really that good. Zeraora can do some setup damage and finish things off on the bench if they've retreated. Same thing for Zapdos, really. I feel like it's just one of those instances where you perhaps don't get a KO with the Rayquaza, and because you have Stormy Range, you can just search these out and finish them off with some of these 3 energy attack costs. It's one of those things where you're preparing for a bad situation to happen. And I often think the reason why you've missed KOs is because you don't have enough Flaaffies in play. So these 2 Pokemon not being able to, Rose to attach are not really going to be able to get into the game anyway in those sorts of board states. So I feel like they're not ideal. And their damage output, isn't insane anyway. So I think you can get away with not playing these sorts of cards and just going pure Rayquaza. Zinnia's Resolve, it's a potential alternate option to Marnie, or an additional option. Can be nice. Again, it's one of these discard synergy cards, which obviously helps us out in those opening stages, but it means we can hold on to hands in certain instances where you're holding on to Boss or Rose, or one of those cards that I think is pretty important to keep track of, or even Flaaffy or whatever if it's your first turn, that sort of thing. And decks are going to be quite board-centric and go wide on those opening turns with a ton of Inteleon engines, potential Cincino engines, and like Altaria, that sort of thing. So you do get value fairly early on with Zinnia's Resolve. So it could be a 1 or 2 count. We have tested with it and it's been reasonable. So just something to bear in mind. And finally, Kricketune V. I do feel like Crobat is going to be better in the opening turns, but Kricketune sort of milks you value throughout the entire game. So it's really that trade-off of saying, do you want the Crobat to be a panic option like turn 1 to draw you like 4 cards and bail you out of a hideous hand, or do you want the Kricketune to potentially not help you in those opening turns quite so much? Maybe it gets you a Panic 1 card or something like that, but then throughout the remainder of the game, if you've been able to air balloon it, you're getting those little bits of value here and there. That's really up to you. I've also thought about having one of each of them in the list, but again, board space is tight. A lot of the time, your quick balls are committed to other Pokemon regardless, so you eventually just kind of have to draw these cards, and I feel like the Crobat serves that function of being the panic button that little bit better than Kricketune, but it's really up to you. I know other people are fans of having exciting stage in their lists, so yeah. Also, the matchup overview then. These are some of the sort of higher contender decks that we're sort of thinking of in the game. I think really the only things that should be on your radar are Urshifu, Inteleon builds where they will quite easily threaten to pick apart your Flaaffys quite early on with that GMAX Rapid Flow. I think you're terrified if they get to go first against you in a best of 3. They oftentimes have outs to actually take those easy prizes, which I think is very scary. And you will be heavily Rose focused if you're actually going to claw out a victory in that matchup. And I also think Glaceon is one to be that little bit afraid of because they have the annoying Crystal Veil, and with the setup damage that the Max Icicle can do, plus quick shooting pings, I think you're falling that little bit behind. I actually think Loki, you're kind of better against the Zamazenta. Yes, I know they have 300 hit points and a healing in between turns, but I think the Rayquazas can fight that little bit better because the Zamazentas have such low damage output. Maybe it's a different case if they start weaving in the Zacians, but it's really all the walling decks are going to be horrible for you. The Decidueye you have no win condition against, so just something to bear in mind there. I think the remainder of the decks you're reasonably okay against. I think there are some hiccups here and there. Victini obviously having that Umbreon Gust play means that you need to commit Ball Search to double Rayquaza, which may mean it's 1 less Flaaffy or whatever, via a Quick Ball or via a Stormy Range, which is always scary. Same thing could be said for Eternatus if they go down an Umbreon route. Leafeon has the Galamine, which is something that you're very afraid of because you're switching in and out is like a really big part of your deck. So that's something to be low-key concerned about. Zacian is a 2-prize attacker, and they force pretty much the same amount of discards by having toughness gates and that sort of thing. So that could be awkward just for how much you need to... Well, you'll kind of worry about running out of steam, really, in that sort of matchup. But I think the Shadow and Ice Riders, they should be reasonable. Now, Ice Rider can try and use Suicune to try and skew that prize race, so something to bear in mind. Shadow Rider with the Alchemy can response 1-hit KO, which is always scary as well. So I don't think Rayquaza is like amazing into any of these matchups, but I think the 2 worst are the Urshi and the Glaceon, so just bear those in mind, really. On to my closing thoughts. I think of the other list that you just saw on the previous slide, we are much more setup reliant than these other decks, which means that we basically can't be creative at all with Rayquaza. You need to just say, let me play my 4 ofs and let that be the win condition. The more times you set up with Ray, the more wins you will get. It's as simple as that. So don't get creative with additional one-of tech Pokemon. Don't get too bogged down in having like comeback style trainer cards like the Trolley and like the Palpad. I feel like ultimately you want to have more hands with more Ball Search cards in the opening 2 turns. Those are going to be your critical moments with the deck. So don't overcomplicate Rayquaza. It needs to be simplified as much as possible. And I also do have that small bit of worry about the Sky High Wave. Sometimes you just draw your roses or bosses at the wrong time. You have to discard them to actually get into the game in the first place, and then it means that you're going to have a longer game plan where you're not able to just bop stuff. But if it was easy, it would be a bonkers deck, right? So there has to be these drawbacks in general. I feel like Rayquaza is going to sit around that tier 2 realm. I know there's a lot of hype around Urshifu right now, and I do think it's warranted. So that probably is going to be keeping Rayquaza at bay that little bit, but that's not to say that you can't beat Rapid Strike Urshifu. We actually had on tabletop a best of 3 series where Rayquaza was able to win. You can go back and watch those videos if you want to. That this has slightly changed from then, but very, very similar overall. And Jack really shows how you can work your way to Rose to victory, regardless of Flaaffy's getting destroyed turn by turn. So yeah, that is Rayquaza. Let me know what you guys think about the archetype and the list itself. Have you got any other things going on in your 60s? And I'll try and argue as to why it should just be an extra Ball Search card, basically. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in another video tomorrow for more Evolving Skies deck lists. Cheers.